Good evening and welcome to Sports Overtime. We are here in our digital studio. You can watch Southeast Sports Plus Monday to Friday, 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We spent this past week previewing a lot of great games in and around college football and basketball with our friends from Nexstar Nation. Here's the best of. For those that don't know the history of this rivalry, this goes back a very long way between the Hogs and the Tigers. Paint a little picture for you.
How far back to go?
You can go back as far as you want to. I just know it from my distant memory in the past.
12 and 4 all time, and they've been in the same conference for a little over a decade.
That's very true. That's very true. For your common fan out there that doesn't know the reason why this is the last game of the season and maybe some of the history, what is it about the Hogs and Tigers that makes this rivalry special?
Honestly, I think it's a little bit interesting because it's one where neither fan base really wants to be. They don't really want it to be their rival, but it's like, hey, who are you? Who are you? Who are you, Missouri, an outsider that joined the SEC? And I believe it was 2012 or 2013, whatever it was. And Arkansas fans, so we don't want to play Missouri. We want to play LSU and Ole Miss and Texas A&M and all that stuff. Arkansas, I'm sorry, you're an outsider too.
Yeah.
It was a 10-team league in 1992. You and South Carolina joined. You were matched up with South Carolina whenever they had a crossover opponent for the first couple, whatever it was, the first 20 years, I guess, at that point of the conference. And that made sense because you both came from the outside. And, I know you don't want to play Missouri because you look down on them or, whether you want to go to a cooler city or whatever. But, it is what it is. Proximity, I think this is the second closest they play. Ole Miss, Oklahoma, I know, is the closest to campus. And then second is either Missouri or Ole Miss. I don't know which one it is. But, there is some cool history here. Frank Broyles, legendary figure in Arkansas, even, with guys like Nolan Richardson and Eddie Sutton, now John Calipari, et cetera, that have Dave Van Horn, Norm DeBrine, that have all walked on this campus. To me, he's the guy. He's the George Washington on the Mount Rushmore there for the University of Arkansas. He was hired from Missouri.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I think it'd be pretty cool if they call it the Battle Line Trophy. I'm not petitioning them to do it or anything like that, but maybe it would have been a little bit cooler if they would have called it the Frank Broyles Trophy or something like that. Would have been a nice honor to him. But it didn't work out that way. Missouri's had their number. What was the graphic?
12
12 and 4 all time.
Yeah, 12 and 4. They won the last three.
So I think Arkansas was like 2-1 or 3-1 maybe before Missouri joined the conference. So it's been very one-sided. A lot of the games do appear to be close. There was one recently where they did smash them. I think it was that 4-8 year for Pittman. They got hammered bad. But Missouri's they're the better program. Fact, not opinion. It doesn't mean they have the better history. It doesn't mean they have more potential or anything like that. It means right now Missouri is a better program than Arkansas. That is perennially in the top 25. That has contended for SEC championships in that time, and it has been closer to the top tier of the SEC and college football since they've joined the conference. Again, fact, not opinion. Arkansas has the fewest wins in the SEC since 2012. People don't like hearing it, but that doesn't change the fact that it's not true. We could, again, the potential and all that stuff. That's a different argument because the reality that we're living in is Arkansas is on the verge of its fourth winless conference season since Petrino was fired in 2012. They won a conference game in 13. They did not win a conference game. Bielema's first year, the two Chad Morris years, and now this year it looks like they may not win a conference game.
Yeah, and I feel like this is, you could make the argument that last year's game meant a little bit something. It was probably the first time a football game has meant something in this rivalry in a long time, since it's mostly dominated by baseball now with the emergence of Tennessee basically running the sport. But what I found interesting coming out last week is that Joey Aguilar, we'll talk about his performance this season here in a minute. I thought it was interesting that he is joining Diego Pavia's fight in trying to get another year of eligibility. So, the timing to me is just funny since they play one another this week, heated rivals, and it's just like, you know what, I'm gonna join your team here in this sense and try to get another year of eligibility.
No, absolutely. Me and Sam Rothman were just talking about that. And it's kind of a weird, catch-22 where it's like, okay, he might be making these comments and he might be, kind of one of the more insufferable, one of the more, just outspoken players that we love to hate in Diego Pavia. But then it's also like, without Diego Pavia, without his lawsuit against the NJCAA, there is no, Joey here in Knoxville. There is no Joey Aguilar coming and playing a season in Knoxville at all. So, you got to thank him, I guess, hey, thank you for your service, Diego Pavia. Now, let's do our best to quiet down a lot of that talk about running the state and doing things that haven't been done before they're actually done. So it's a little bit of okay, we appreciate what you did in getting Joey over here and him wearing, the orange colors. Obviously, a lot of moving pieces into that. You also got to thank Nico for all of that. But certainly an interesting situation with the two joining together as plaintiffs and potentially having another year in Knoxville, which, again, without Diego Pavia, there certainly is no 2 years with Joey Aguilar, so we'll see how things shake out on that end.
Yeah, no question. That's a really interesting dynamic. Speaking from Joey's perspective in general, he's coming off of really good games. I think he has a lot of confidence coming into this, playing well in the Swamp, 31-11, the final there in that matchup. From his growth, from the time he won the job in fall camp to where he is now, what do you think that he has been able to both tangibly or intangibly be able to help lead and grow this team and this offense, and what's his ceiling if he does get that chance to stay another year?
No, I think certainly Vol fans would be interested in him, staying another year purely for just that experience. And it is kind of an interesting year for him because it hasn't just been a steady growth from week 1 to where we are now in week 13 and 14. It has been a little bit of a roller coaster, a little bit of an up and down. This game against Florida might have been his best game since he played Georgia. It was very similar in the fact that game against Georgia, I think he started 13 of 13 with nearly 200 yards. And then here against Florida the other night, he started 11-11 with, about 120 yards as well. So this was one of his more efficient performances in some time. It's been a little shaky as far, he's been consistent. He's Mr. Consistent when it comes to 200 yards. He has not had a game in his NCAA career where he's thrown under 200 yards. Even that stayed the same against Florida this week when he really didn't need to throw for 200 yards. So he has that consistency. There has been a little up and down, especially when it comes to the turnovers. We've talked about that the last couple of weeks where the interceptions have become more a factor, but all looked good against Florida. He's playing his best football coming out of that game. The Vol fans say thank you for breaking that streak for us. We saw him, he was, having some fun with the band after the game and having a lot of fun down there in the Swamp. So certainly Vol fans are all about Joey Aguilar right now.
Well, they certainly have a streak in this rivalry coming up this week. They've won the last 6. Let's take a look at last year's game because obviously this meant something to Vol fans and the Vol team. It was pretty much a win and you're in the college football playoff scenario. What do you remember the most about that game?
Yeah, that one certainly was one of those where you're like, are we really at this point? Like, are we really at the point where it's no longer entirely our state, where it's no longer, this is our little brother who, we pick on and we can guarantee that that's one win to close the year, and now that we're back at this point to where it's okay, Vegas has us as 2.5-point favorites at home in Neyland. That's basically a toss-up, a pick-em. You always like to see the home team at least have 3 points to be considered, quote-unquote favorites. Now it's 2.5 coming into this week, so even Vegas is like, yeah, take your pick. Either team could win. So certainly the Vols, the fans, the team, Coach Heupel, they're not going to take any of that disrespect. They're going to treat this as, we don't care if we have no shot at getting into the playoffs. We don't care if we have, the most outside chance of ever. We don't care what the rest of the season looks like. We have to beat Vandy. I was talking to one of our friends over here in Knoxville, Sports Source, last week, and he was saying, if you lose to Florida, okay, like, that stinks. They're not a very good team. but the streak is still going. We don't really expect to win in Florida because it's been this long. You don't lose to Vandy. You don't lose to Vandy if they're 12-0. You don't lose to Vandy if they're the number one team in the nation. You do not lose to Vandy. This will be a very, very long and grumbling off season if Vandy can pull this off, if they can get into the playoffs while the Vols are sitting at home, come mid-December. So this is a game where they're going to be throwing in all the chips to make sure that that team over there in Nashville doesn't get the win.
Stay with us here on Sports Overtime. And remember, you can watch our show, Southeast Sports Plus, from 2 to 4 o'clock on the free WKRG Plus app. You can find us on your Roku, Fire TV, or Apple TV device. You mentioned Marcel Reed, limited time against Samford. You kind of expected that going in. You also expect him to play the full 4 quarters this time around. Given up what he did in the second half of the South Carolina game and the time that he spent on the field against the Samford Bulldogs, what do you make of where this quarterback sits right now as it relates to the Heisman Trophy race? I know that from an odds perspective, he's a bit behind the guys like Fernando Mendoza and Jeremiah Love and some of the others, but do you expect or can you see a situation where he gives himself maybe a Heisman moment against the Longhorns?
Maybe if he throws for like 400 yards and 6 touchdowns against the Longhorns. But the stats look great. Don't get me wrong. I think he's had a stellar season. If they left him in maybe a little bit longer, maybe inflate those stats a little bit, it would have been a little bit closer. But I think you're right. The odds just don't really line up in his favor. He is a finalist. I actually have that in my show today. He's a finalist for the Davey O'Brien Award, so nice. For the nation's top quarterback. Nice. I definitely see a way where if he has a stellar outing against Texas, you beat Notre Dame, you beat Texas, you beat LSU, which doesn't look incredible, but you come back and then the Heisman sort of performance against South Carolina in that second half. Mm-hmm. I think his resume stacks up pretty well to win that award. But as you know, the Heisman voting, you got to be on a winning team. You got to have the stats to do it. Most of the time, you got to be a quarterback, unless you're putting up insane numbers like Jeremiah Love is. So I think Heisman might be out of the reach, but Davey O'Brien Award for sure for the nation's best quarterback.
Well, if history does repeat itself every 10 years when the year ends in a 5, it's the running back that wins the Heisman with Derrick Henry back in 2015. But talking about Marcel Reed here, he has played against Texas. He did get in last year's game, and I mean, it's hard to throw him in that situation with Connor Wigman and now Marcel Reed being able to take over. What do you expect him to look like against this Texas defense?
I think a lot more confident than he did last year, and that's something that we've seen really throughout all of this season. Is his confidence has gone through the roof, not just as the leader of this football team, but as a passer as well. I think he's gotten so much better with hitting those deep balls. You saw it a little bit against South Carolina, a little bit against Utah State in these last 2 games. Whether he can carry that over, I think, is the biggest thing. But so far in these big games, even in his first career start as Texas A&M's head quarterback, he played very well on the road at Florida. And I think that's something that he's always been accustomed to doing, is playing well on the road. Can he do it against their chief rival is the biggest question. And I think he can. I think he will play much, much better than he did last year. But he's also got to outduel Arch. And that's going to be the biggest storyline between these two teams.
I think last year this was one of the most highly anticipated rivalry games because it had been so long since we had seen it, and now it goes back to a different spot. Before we get your thoughts on it, let's listen to Coach Mike Elko here on this rivalry.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge in this game and it's rivalry games in general. I don't know that it's necessarily even specific to this one. It's the emotions are going to be high. The energy is going to be high. Through all of that, you've got to find a laser focus to do the things that you have to do to go out and be successful, play in and play out. Sometimes you can want something so bad it almost blinds you. You got to be really careful of that, and I think that's always the thing that comes up in these rivalry games when you talk about how bad each team wants to be successful. It's the team that can really kind of rise above the moment a little bit and maintain that focus and maintain the composure that they need to go out and be successful.
For those that are not in the Lone Star State, Parker, what are some of the things that come up to mind when it comes to this rivalry? Because I find it very unique because, like we talked about before the soundbite, that they hadn't played in a while, but then they got back on the field as members of the SEC, and then now this game being back at DKR there in Austin, it just seems like something magical is not only set to happen, but it feels like we've been waiting for this for a really long time, ever since Texas was, set to join the conference.
Yeah, it's definitely a game, a must-watch game, and I don't really expect that many. We're the Fox affiliate over here. That game's going to be on ABC. I don't expect many people to be watching our channel come Friday night for Black Friday, but I think that's just something that adds to it, too. The day after Thanksgiving, that's typically when these games have been played, sometimes on Thanksgiving for Texas and Texas A&M. So just adding to that history, I think you're seeing it right now. Texas leads it pretty handily. I think it's a common theme in college football with these rivalries, right? The big brother, little brother syndrome, where fan bases try to argue one way or the other. I think Texas definitely feels like they're the big brother in this scenario because Texas A&M has never made it to that conference championship game, and they've been in the conference for over a decade now. So I think that's something that Texas A&M has always been trying to get to, that mountaintop, and they couldn't even do that when Johnny Manziel was winning that Heisman
Very
season.
true.
And so I think that's something that they feel like maybe this could upset the balance here in Texas. And I think that's something that adds to the lore of this game. It adds to the history. Obviously, it's a bitter rivalry. Football's huge in Texas, but this is probably the most impactful rivalry in Texas. And, we got Baylor-TCU also. That's the longest standing rivalry. I think this one, no question, trumps that for sure.
Stay with us here on Sports Overtime. And remember, you can watch our show, Southeast Sports Plus, from 2 to 4 o'clock on the free WKRG Plus app. You can find us on your Roku, Fire TV, or Apple TV device. While we've considered this Iron Bowl as one of the staples in college football, I find really interesting the subtext of this is just the inconsistency with the coaches so far.
Right, and it's been such an interesting matchup. I mean, you talk about this with it being a new coaching matchup every year.
Yeah.
It just reminds me of Jalen Hurts having to deal with a new play caller every year. Former Alabama guy, but I think this one is just going to have an added feel, and we'll get to our score predictions here in a minute, but there's just something weird that's going to be in the air on Saturday night, and the fact that it is a night game, that has to be scary for Alabama.
Yeah, absolutely. We will hear from Alabama head coach Kalen DeBoer getting his second taste of this rivalry.
And know what that means to the state here. A huge deal for us as well. Just, it's a big game. It's for a lot of reasons, but, we just focus on what it is, and it's a big rivalry game. It's an SEC game on the road. Be an awesome environment. Just blessed to be a part of it, especially here on this Thanksgiving week. That's what you think about, and there's so much we have, and these guys getting this opportunity to go and to play in a special place like that, and in front of, so many fans and people watching on TV. Just a really cool moment. We got to seize it and take advantage of it.
Last time we were here for the Iron Bowl at Jordan-Hare Stadium, Alabama ended up winning the football game 27-24 on the Gravedigger play, and just an unbelievable scene, an unbelievable moment, and it's one of those that the named games to me have always like a lot more intrigue, because you have the Gravedigger play, you of course have the Kick Six, which is probably the most famous game in college football history, and I feel like we could be on the verge of another one of those games this year. It just seems to be, you're talking more etherical than you are practical,
right?
But it just seems to be setting up to where it's something memorable happens in this matchup.
And personally, from my memories of this game, it always felt like when this one is in Tuscaloosa, it felt like Alabama had the edge every time, because it was always the fact that whenever you head to the Plains, it just felt something weird in the air for Alabama, and that's when you'd get some of the more crazy games for Auburn coming out with victory. And there is such thing as a home field advantage. I know some people want to be like, oh, no, we're just going to a road game. And and talking about, the prep's the same. No, the prep is a little bit different. It has a little bit more meaning. And whenever coaches and players and stuff say that, it's just like, no, you're trying to cover up this rivalry a little bit, because there's definitely added meaning.
Right. That's our show tonight. Remember, you can watch Southeast Sports Plus Monday to Friday from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock on the free WKRG Plus app. Catch us on your Roku, Fire TV, or Apple TV device. Good night.